I was born into a world of unshakable faith, where every sunrise was greeted with whispered prayers and every evening closed with the weight of sacred traditions. My childhood was steeped in the rhythms of devotion, long hours of study, hands tracing ancient words, the scent of burning candles mingling with the pages of text worn by generations before me. My father, Nathaniel Steinberg, was a respected Torah scholar in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. His wisdom was renowned, his memory astonishing. He could recite entire passages with flawless precision, a gift that made him both admired and feared in our community. He demanded the same excellence from me. "David, you are a Ben Torah, a son of the Torah," he would say with pride, his deep voice unwavering. "You must honor it with your entire life." My mother, Miriam, embodied devotion in its purest form. She dedicated her days to our home, ensuring everything was prepared in accordance with the laws of kashrut, her soft murmurs of prayer never ceasing. Her world was one of faith, sacrifice, and an unyielding belief that our obedience brought us closer to the Almighty. From a young age, I was set apart. While other children played in the streets, I sat in the dimly lit study halls of my yeshiva, memorizing ancient texts with fervor beyond my years. The Torah was not merely a book. It was the very air I breathed, the foundation of my existence. By the time I was 12, I had surpassed my peers in knowledge. My teachers whispered about me, calling me a prodigy. By 18, I was teaching younger students, guiding them through the labyrinth of halacha with the same unwavering discipline my father had instilled in me. At 25, I was appointed as a rabbi in one of Manhattan's most esteemed synagogues. It was an honor that should have filled me with pride, but instead, an unsettling restlessness gnawed at me. I buried it beneath my responsibilities. I delivered sermons, led prayers, counseled those seeking guidance. To my congregation, I was a pillar of wisdom, an unwavering voice of truth. Yet within me, questions began to stir. It started subtly, passages in the Tanakh that I had read 100 times before suddenly felt different. Isaiah 53, for example, troubled me deeply. Who was this suffering servant described with such sorrow? Could it truly be just a metaphor for Israel, as I had been taught? Or was there something more? One evening, as I sat in my study, my wife, Rebecca, entered, her dark eyes filled with warmth as she placed a cup of tea on my desk. "You're thinking again," she said with a knowing smile. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "There are things I don't understand." She sat beside me, her fingers grazing mine. "Like what?" I hesitated. How could I put into words the weight pressing on my soul? Some scriptures, they seem to speak of something, someone that we might have missed. Rebecca frowned. "The rabbis have explained these passages for centuries, David. You're overthinking." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Maybe you're right," but the unease remained. I convinced myself it was just a test, a challenge of faith that I would overcome with more study, more discipline, more prayer. Yet, the questions never faded. And then one night, everything changed. It was an ordinary evening. Rebecca was in the kitchen, humming softly as she cleaned up after dinner. The house was filled with the quiet peace of routine. Our life was structured, predictable, comforting. As I rinsed the last dish, I noticed that our toaster had stopped working. It had been acting up for weeks, and tonight, it seemed completely unresponsive. "Let me see if I can fix this," I muttered, half to myself. Rebecca glanced over her shoulder. "Be careful, David. Just wait until morning." "I'll be fine," I assured her, already grabbing a screwdriver. I prided myself on being able to handle small household fixes. This would take 5 minutes at most. I unplugged the toaster, or so I thought, and began adjusting the wiring inside. But what I failed to notice was the slight moisture left behind from dinner preparations. The moment my fingers touched the exposed wiring, an indescribable force surged through my body. The pain was instantaneous, searing, as if fire itself had wrapped around me. My muscles locked. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Every nerve in my body felt as if it were being torn apart by an invisible hand. Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went dark. I heard Rebecca's scream, distant and distorted. Then silence. I was no longer in my kitchen. I was nowhere. We love reading your names and cities in the comments. And today we have a surprise for some of you. At the end of this video, we will reveal the lucky names chosen to receive a special message from us. If you want to be part of our next video and have your name mentioned for thousands of people to hear, drop a comment below with your name and city, and don't forget to hit the like button to let us know you're here. And of course, if you haven't yet, join our growing community by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another incredible story like this one. Now let's continue. The silence was absolute. I was floating weightless, yet I felt no wind against my skin, no sensation of movement. The world I had known, the warmth of my home, the scent of fresh brewed tea, Rebecca's voice was gone. In its place was a void so complete, so suffocating, that I felt as though I had been stripped of my very existence. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but there was no dreamlike haze, no disjointed imagery. Instead, there was only darkness. But it was not the darkness of a room with the lights turned off. No, this was deeper, thicker, something alive. It pressed against me, wrapping around me like an unseen force, not touching my body, but sinking into something far more intimate, my very soul. And then I heard them, whispers. At first, they were faint, just murmurs at the edge of my perception, like echoes of voices speaking from a great distance. But they grew louder, filling the void, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of despair. Some voices were weeping, others were shouting. A few recited prayers I recognized, yet they were spoken with tones of hopelessness, not faith. I felt something cold seep into me, something that carried the weight of regret, of lost time, of a truth realized too late. And then I understood. These voices, they weren't just near me. They were inside me. I wasn't merely hearing them. I was feeling them, living them, as though their sorrow had become my own. I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the void. My breath, if I even still had breath, felt trapped in my chest. A suffocating panic took hold of me. I didn't belong here. This wasn't where I was meant to be. And yet, I was here, and so were they. Then, out of the darkness, shapes began to emerge. At first, they were just shadows, indistinct forms shifting in the void, moving with an eerie slowness. But as they drew closer, I recognized them. Faces, not strangers, not unknown souls lost in this abyss. These were men I had known, teachers, scholars, rabbis I had studied under, revered, and followed with unwavering devotion. My breath caught in my throat. My mentor from yeshiva, Rabbi Cohen, stood before me, his face lined with an agony I had never seen in life. He had been a man of wisdom, a leader, a pillar of faith. What was he doing here? His hollow eyes locked onto mine. "David," he whispered, "you are here because you have walked our path. And if you do not listen, you will share our fate." A terrible weight settled upon me. What fate? My own voice trembled, weaker than I had ever heard it before. More figures appeared, their faces etched with the same expression: grief, longing, sorrow that ran deeper than flesh and bone. I recognized them all. Rabbis who had shaped my understanding of faith, leaders I had trusted, friends who had once stood beside me in prayer. And all of them bore the same look of torment. Rabbi Cohen stepped forward, his presence towering over me despite the brokenness in his expression. "We were blind," he said, "and we led others into blindness." I shook my head. "No, you were men of faith, men of truth. You taught the Torah, the words of the Almighty." His face twisted with something between anguish and revelation. "We taught shadows, David. We studied the words, but we refused to see the light." A murmur rippled through the others, voices of agreement, voices of sorrow. "Everything we did," another voice spoke. Rabbi Goldstein, a man I had once revered. "The prayers, the laws, the sacrifices, they all pointed to something greater, to someone greater." A slow dread crept into me. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to hear the answer. But the words left my lips before I could stop them. To whom? Rabbi Cohen's eyes darkened with pain. The Messiah. The moment he spoke those words, something inside me cracked. The Messiah. The very one I had spent my entire life waiting for, preaching about, studying in the ancient texts. The one I had believed had not yet come. The one we were still waiting for. I tried to deny it. No, I whispered. No, that cannot be. Rabbi Cohen took another step forward. His voice was filled with a sorrow so profound it threatened to consume me. The one the scriptures foretold. He came, David. His voice trembled, and we rejected him. Something inside me recoiled. Rejected? No, impossible. My mind raced back to the words that had always troubled me. The prophecies in Isaiah, the cries of the suffering servant, the passages that had left me with questions I dared not speak. But the greatest fear I had was not in their words. It was in the feeling creeping into my soul. A terrible, undeniable knowing. Rabbi Cohen's voice dropped to a whisper. And now we are here. A great silence settled over the space. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But where could I go? I was trapped in the abyss, surrounded by the voices of those who had come before me. Men whose fates I did not understand. Men who were once like me. And in that moment, a single thought burned into my mind. What if they were right? I stood frozen in the abyss, surrounded by the voices of men I had once admired. Their words echoed inside me, a terrible, unraveling truth clawing at the walls of my mind. I wanted to reject it, to push it away, to claim that I was still in control of my own understanding. But how could I? I was no longer standing in a synagogue, no longer surrounded by books and scholars, no longer bound by the walls of tradition and certainty that had defined my entire existence. I was here, wherever here was, and I could feel it, something shifting, something moving in the void. The darkness was alive. It pressed against me, not with physical weight, but with a crushing awareness, as if it was conscious, as if it knew every hidden thought in the deepest recesses of my soul. I wasn't just in a place. I was being seen. Then, without warning, the voices stopped. A silence fell over the abyss, thick and suffocating. And that's when I sensed it. Something else was here. Something that did not belong to the darkness. At first, it was barely perceptible, like the faintest flicker at the edge of my awareness, a whisper of something beyond this emptiness. But then it grew. A warmth, an energy, an approaching presence unlike anything I had ever encountered. I turned, or at least I felt like I did, though I wasn't sure I had a body in this place. And then I saw it, a light. It was distant at first, impossibly far, but as I focused on it, it began to move, drawing closer, growing brighter. The darkness recoiled. The very air, if such a thing existed in this space, seemed to shudder in response. The light was not merely illumination. It carried authority, power, holiness. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Something within me, something deep, recognized this presence. It was familiar, yet terrifying in its purity. It was the feeling I had searched for my entire life, the presence I had longed to experience in my prayers, in my studies, in the depths of my most desperate cries for truth. And now here it was. I trembled, not from fear, but from something far greater. Reverence. The light grew until it filled my entire vision, consuming everything in its wake. The darkness shrank back like a wounded animal, writhing as though it could not withstand the presence approaching. Then, the light took form. At first, it was just a silhouette, a figure emerging from the radiance, its shape human yet beyond human. It was clothed in something that defied explanation. Not fabric, not mere garments, but glory itself, shimmering like molten gold and ivory flame. And then I saw its face. I cannot describe it, not because it was indistinct, but because it was too much, too radiant, too overwhelming, too filled with authority and love to be contained in human language. But the eyes I will never forget. They were deep, endless wells of fire and compassion, seeing through every mask I had ever worn, every lie I had ever told myself, every doubt, every sin, every failure. And yet, There was no condemnation in them. Only truth. Only love. Then the figure spoke, and the moment it did, my soul shattered. David. That was all. Just my name. And yet it was everything. It was a call, a summons, a revelation, a homecoming all at once. I felt my knees buckle. Not physically, for I was no longer bound by flesh, but in the deepest part of my being. I knew who this was. I had known it the moment I laid eyes upon him. The weight of it struck me like a wave, crashing over me with unrelenting force. He was him, the one I had spent my life searching for, the one I had preached about, debated about, studied about, yet never truly seen. The Messiah, the servant of Isaiah 53, the one my teachers had told me was yet to come. And yet, he was here. He had always been here. The full realization of it made something inside me break. I had missed him. I had spent my life looking at shadows, memorizing words about him, teaching others to wait for someone who had already come. And now, here he was standing before me. I wanted to speak, to ask, to plead. But before I could utter a single word, his voice came again. And this time, he did not simply speak. He declared. The voice that spoke my name was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was not merely sound. It was substance, carrying the weight of eternity itself. It did not strike my ears, but resonated within the core of my being, as though every fiber of my soul recognized it before my mind could comprehend. And yet, though it bore unimaginable authority, it also carried gentleness, a kindness so profound that I felt as if I had always known it. It was the voice of truth. The figure before me, the Messiah, took another step forward. The light surrounding him didn't just illuminate, it revealed. Every doubt I had ever clung to, every justification I had whispered to myself in the dark, every excuse for why I had never truly sought him, they all crumbled under the sheer weight of his presence. I knew who he was, and the realization sent tremors through my very essence. I had spent my entire life studying the scriptures, analyzing prophecy, dissecting the words of the prophets, and yet I had never truly seen him. But he had seen me. All along, he had seen me. And now, there was no veil, no barrier, no excuse that could separate me from the truth that burned before me. The Messiah looked into me, past my thoughts, past my knowledge, past the titles I had earned, the prestige I had gained. And he knew me. Then he spoke again. I have always been here. The words struck me like a wave, not with condemnation, but with revelation. I was written in the scriptures you devoted your life to. I was the promise given to your fathers. I was the shadow and the sacrifices, the fulfillment of the prophecies, the answer to the longing in your soul. But you did not see. Tears streamed down my face, or what I could only perceive as my face in this place, because everything he said was true. I had spent decades searching, but I had been blind. I read the Torah. I whispered, my voice barely audible, broken by the weight of my own sorrow. The Messiah's eyes softened. You read the words, he said, but you did not see the word. I gasped because I understood. He was the Word. He had always been there, woven into the very fabric of the scriptures, waiting to be recognized. Genesis, the seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. Exodus, the lamb whose blood would deliver his people from death. Isaiah, the servant who would be pierced for our transgressions. Psalms, the forsaken one whose hands and feet would be pierced. And now, here he stood before me, not as a mystery, not as an unfulfilled prophecy, but as the living truth. I fell to my knees, not because I was commanded to, but because I could not stand in his presence. The Messiah reached out a hand and touched me. The moment he did, an unimaginable flood of light and understanding surged through me. I saw it all. The veil was lifted. Every moment in history, every word spoken by the prophets, every festival, every sacrifice, every law, it had all pointed to him. I wept, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming realization. I had waited for the Messiah, and yet, he had come long before I ever took my first breath. He had come, and I had missed him. But here, in this place, he had come for me. And in that instant, I knew Everything in my life was about to change. If you're enjoying this story and want to be a part of this incredible community, let me know where you're watching from. Comment your name and your city below, because in our next video, we'll be giving a special shout out to some of you. In the final of this video, we will send a special message for the lucky people. And of course, if you haven't yet, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this one. Now let's continue. I was still kneeling before him, trembling beneath the weight of what I had just seen, what I had just understood. My entire life, every prayer I had uttered, every scripture I had studied, every sacrifice I had witnessed, had led me to this moment. And now, there was no turning back. The Messiah looked at me with an expression I cannot describe. It was filled with love, but also with urgency, as if he had been waiting for me to wake up, to see, to finally understand what had been true all along. "You must return," he said. His words sent a shock through me. Return? How could I return? How could I go back to the world I had known, the life I had lived, after this? How could I look at my people, the ones I had led in prayer, the ones I had taught in the synagogues, the ones who trusted me, and tell them what I had seen? They would never believe me. They would reject me. They would cast me out. My wife, my community, my mentors, they would call me a heretic. And yet, even as those thoughts filled my mind, the Messiah's voice cut through them like fire. "You will not be alone." I looked up at him, my lips trembling. But they won't listen," I whispered. "They will turn away from me. My wife, my own people, they will reject me." His eyes softened, but the strength in his voice remained unshaken. "They rejected me first." The weight of those words pressed down on my soul, and in an instant I saw it. I saw the crowds shouting for his death. I saw the religious leaders, men like me, denouncing him, clinging to their power, refusing to see what was right before their eyes. I saw the suffering. I saw the cross. I saw him, beaten, bloodied, humiliated, carrying the weight of the world's sin upon his shoulders. I saw the very people he came to save turn against him. And yet, he still came for them. For me. For all of us. Tears spilled from my eyes as I realized the truth. If the Messiah himself had been rejected, how could I expect anything different? "You were chosen," he said, his voice firm. "Not because you are worthy, not because you are strong, but because I have given you a mission." I trembled. "What mission?" His hand rested upon me, and in an instant, images flooded my mind. I saw my wife standing before me, her eyes filled with fear, confusion, doubt. I saw the leaders of my synagogue, their faces hard with anger and disbelief. I saw the community I had once called home, the people I had guided, the ones who had trusted me, turning away. And then I saw something else. Faces. Men, women, children, some from my own people, some from places I did not recognize. I saw their expressions change from doubt to understanding, from blindness to sight. Some rejected me, but others listened. Some saw what I had seen. Some believed. And then I understood. My mission was not to convince everyone. It was to speak the truth, no matter the cost. It was to open the door, even if only a few were willing to walk through it. It was to testify. I took a shaky breath, but I don't know how. The Messiah's hand lifted, and for the first time, a smile crossed his face. "My spirit will guide you," he said. "I will give you the words when you have none. I will give you strength when you feel weak. You are not alone, David. You will never be alone." And then the light surrounding him began to expand. It grew brighter, enveloping everything around me. I felt its warmth, its overwhelming peace, its indescribable power. I knew, without a doubt, that I had been changed. And then everything went dark. Pain. It was the first thing I felt as I was pulled back into my body. A crushing, unbearable weight on my chest. A burning in my lungs, as though I had been held underwater for far too long. My fingers twitched, my limbs ached, and then a gasp. Air flooded into me, my lungs expanding violently as I returned to life. Voices. Chaos. Hands pressing against my skin. My eyes fluttered open, the harsh fluorescent lights above me blinding. The sound of beeping machines and hurried footsteps filled my ears. "He's back," someone shouted. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, weak, as if I had been drained of all strength. Then another voice, one I would recognize anywhere. "David! Rebecca!" I turned my head, my vision still blurry, and saw her beside me, tears streaming down her face. She was clutching my hand so tightly it hurt, her fingers trembling. I wanted to speak, to tell her I was okay, but my throat was dry, and the words wouldn't come. The paramedics moved around me, checking my pulse, flashing a light into my eyes, muttering numbers to each other. 14 minutes, one of them said. He was out for 14 minutes? Another medic shook his head, exhaling in disbelief. That's impossible. I didn't need to ask what they meant. I had been dead. For 14 minutes, my heart had stopped. For 14 minutes, I had been somewhere else. For 14 minutes, I had seen him. And now I was back. Rebecca was still gripping my hand, her face pale and full of fear. "David, what happened? Are you okay?" I swallowed, forcing my throat to cooperate. My voice was hoarse when I finally spoke. I saw something." Rebecca's expression tightened. "You were unconscious." "You were?" Her voice cracked. "David, you died." "I know," I whispered. Silence hung between us. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the desperate hope mixed with uncertainty. She wanted to believe I was okay, but something deeper was unsettling her. And I knew why. Because I was not the same man she had married. How could I be? How could I return from what I had seen and pretend that nothing had changed? I had looked into his eyes. I had felt his presence. I had been given a mission. And now, I had to face the truth. Not everyone would be ready to hear it. Not my congregation. Not my friends. Not even Rebecca. But I had no choice. I had to speak, even if it cost me everything. If you're still here, I just want to take a moment to say, thank you. We don't make any money doing this. We share these stories because we believe in them, because we know how powerful they can be. If you've been moved by this story, if you're enjoying these videos, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. It's a small thing, but it helps us so much. We want this community to grow, to reach as many people as possible. And you can be a part of that just by liking, subscribing, and sharing. Thank you for being here. Now let's continue. I was alive, but I was no longer the same man. The paramedics had called it a miracle. My wife had called it unbelievable. But I knew the truth. I had been sent back with a mission. Lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by wires and machines, I could still feel him. The warmth of his presence, the weight of his words. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. It had been real. I had seen the Messiah, and now I had to tell the world. When I was discharged, I expected things to return to normal. But they didn't. Rebecca tried to act like everything was fine, but I could see it in her eyes. The doubt, the hesitation, the fear that her husband had changed in a way she didn't understand. She wasn't wrong. The old David was gone. The man who had once stood at the pulpit, confident in his knowledge, unwavering in his traditions. He had died that night. In his place was someone reborn, someone who could no longer ignore the truth. I tried to explain it to her, softly at first. "Rebecca, I saw him. I saw the Messiah." Her face paled. "David, you were unconscious. You were without oxygen for." She took a sharp breath. "It's possible your mind created something to help you cope." I shook my head. "No, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. I was there, Rebecca, and he was there too." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "David, do you even hear yourself? Do you know what you're saying?" I did. I knew exactly what I was saying, and I knew exactly how she would react. Because I had been her once. I had been the skeptic. I had been the one who dismissed, who reasoned, who refused to see. And now, I was the one standing on the other side. I wish I could say my congregation welcomed my testimony, that they rejoiced in my experience, that they listened, but they didn't. When I stood before them and spoke of what I had seen, their expressions hardened. Some shook their heads in quiet disapproval. Others outright stood and walked out. The rabbi who had once mentored me, who had called me a pillar of the community, rose slowly from his seat. His voice was low, filled with warning. "David," he said, "retract what you've said. Think of your wife. Think of your position. Think of your people." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. I had spent my entire life upholding their expectations. But now, I could no longer deny the truth. I lifted my head, meeting his eyes with newfound strength. "I can't." Silence filled the synagogue. Then a slow exhale from my former mentor. "Then you are no longer welcome here." Just like that, my entire world was torn away. My congregation, my position, my family. Rebecca stood in the back, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes filled with tears. She knew what this meant. She knew the consequences. I had lost everything, but I had found him, and he was worth it all. The road ahead wasn't easy. For months, I was lost, adrift between what I had once known and what I had now seen. I had no synagogue, no congregation, no certainty of what came next. But I had a mission. The Messiah had told me to testify, and that is what I would do, even if I had to do it alone. But then, slowly, others began to find me. People who had seen what I had seen. People who had also been rejected, cast out, disowned for believing in what was true. We gathered in small groups, sharing stories, reading scriptures with new eyes, and realizing just how much we had missed. We were no longer blind, and though the road was hard, we were not alone. He was with us, and he always would be. Before we go, I want to send a very special message to some of you. Tracy Regina from New Jersey, David Perez from Watford, North Dakota, Tina Patterson from New York, Debbie from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Maureen Schmidt from Caloundra, Queensland, Australia, Ray Killorn from Union Gap, Washington, Nadej Eve from Cape Town, South Africa, Jolly from Uganda, Jimmy Byers from Palm Harbor, Florida. You are seen, you are loved, and you are part of this incredible community. May your life be filled with truth, light, and unshakable faith. If your name wasn't mentioned this time, don't give up. Keep commenting your name and city below, and maybe in the next video, you will be chosen for a special shout-out. Now, don't stop here. There is another video waiting for you, one that could change your life forever. Just click on the video on the screen and continue this incredible journey with us. And before you go, don't forget to hit the like button and comment Amen below. Let's spread this message and continue to be blessed together. Subscribe and be part of this growing family. We don't do this for money. We do this because we believe in it. And your support means everything to us. See you in the next video. Blessings to you all.